Sure, there's going to be plenty of things that I miss in this story that I'll probably think of later that I wanted to add in because I can get very scattered about it. Right now I'm just focusing on getting this done with because even though my sleep hasn't been that great lately and I've been struggling a lot with anxiety and nightmares, I want this over, you know, now that I've gotten into the middle of it. It's one of those that I just want to get through. And so out of the 3 days that they commit to for every individual that comes there, the first day, which should have consisted of a minimum of 4 to 6 hours of prayers, and then I think like 1 or 2 hours of interview, in the end only consisted of a several hour interview and even interrogation and kind of procrastination, and 10-15 minutes tops, 20 tops of prayers. And even in those 20 minutes there were so many manifestations and things that happened that we were pretty certain almost the reason they kind of didn't push for more, try harder to get more done that day, other than an experience, because again Rippinger was not there. You know, we thought for sure they knew and they didn't really need to test anymore, much more, but they still did the 3 days, and that's what we committed to. So we come in on the second morning and do the 20-minute Trinity and Latin Mass thing, and started right away with the prayers because they'd said that they wanted to catch up on that since we didn't get that done yesterday, because the tow guy, the tire guy, whatever these people are, I remember there they called them the wrecker. We were waiting for the wrecker to come. I guess that's what they call them in Oklahoma. And so another interesting thing that I forgot to mention was they didn't offer to help. It was like going to be a pretty simple fix type thing. And I know how people can be all touchy about men and women, and men knowing how to fix things in cars and women not, but I don't know how to fix a lot of things with cars. You know, I can basically change the oil and call for help. But they wouldn't look at it, and I remember her asking if they wouldn't mind helping, and they wouldn't, and they said that they couldn't. And the reason that they couldn't, which again, let me say that Parinello is the only one that really talked. The other priest just kind of sat in the background and observed. He didn't really ever say anything much. So he said that they couldn't because then if something happens they could be held liable and we could sue them or something, you know. Gotta love the Catholics, always worried about being sued, even though they have plenty of money to pay out to people and get away with and have the best lawyers to get away with stuff, you know. But yeah, so that was more important too. Their fear of a lawsuit was more important. The wrecker taking forever and possibly hearing something was more important. The conference Rippinger was at was far more important. There was just nothing making sense. I basically flew out there and went through everything that I went through to be interrogated by a priest who didn't know me, that had been observing somebody else for like a year or two. He took a lot of notes. I remember he took a lot of notes. So the second day is when I brought the paperwork in, because the first day I forgot the paperwork and documentation, and he emphasized to make sure that I brought that in the next day, so that they could look at it that night, because apparently that was going to be a huge part of them determining what approach they were going to take or what they were going to do. And so I brought all of it for him and gave it to him that morning. Did the Mass and got into these prayers. And I think I already mentioned this in the previous video. They were having me try to pray prayers myself and repeat these litanies on, you know, the Catholic Church and their idols and things like that. And I had difficulties and struggled in the typical type of manifestations, choking, gagging, freezing, like as in not moving, freezing, and just probably a lot more internally than what could be seen externally most of the time. I would just be absolutely tormented internally, and I might just look like I'm standing there and uncomfortable maybe, but in reality I feel like I'm about to just crawl out of my skin. And that's how it was a good amount of the time, not even at Oklahoma, but elsewhere back home. So when I'd asked for the break and had recollected myself and was gearing up to go back in there, they'd all been heading out and just asked me to come sit in this other room. Parinello sits down and starts to talk, and he says, well, there's clearly a very severe demonic possession going on here. Those are his words exactly. He actually used obsession and possession, but clearly a severe demonic obsession and possession. That's been determined already. What we haven't determined is to the extent of how serious and how deep it goes. And that's why we need to continue doing these testing prayers today and tomorrow. These are his words exactly, I'm telling you guys. So that's what he says first, and despite the fact that the exorcist that was supposed to be there isn't there, and still isn't there, and that the whole first day went pretty much to waste compared to what they were supposed to do and what they committed to doing, especially for the magnitude of what I dealt with and what we did to get there, and that we only had the 3 days. And so I was a little bit hopeful in that moment, just a tad. And then the most bizarre thing happened. He like almost shifted expression and position and everything. I don't know how else to explain it. It was almost like something else kind of went through his mind, and he just kind of thought for a second, and then he said, after hearing all of this about your life and the abuse and everything that you've been through, it's more than I've ever heard of anybody in my life. And I said, okay, I've gotten that before. He said, these were his words exactly, I can't imagine. He said, I can't imagine someone going through the traumas and the amount of trauma that you have been through. Alright? I can't imagine them, someone going through that and having that amount of trauma and demons being able to be expelled without serious psychological, intensive psychological treatment, therapy, whatnot. Basically that the demonic possession is there, the demonic obsession, however they wanted to say it, was there, but that the trauma and psychological problems that I must have from the severe amount of trauma that I went through must be on top of it, holding them in, keeping them from manifesting to the full extent, or keeping it from being productive, which here it started to get a little bit confusing, because first he says, oh, we know that you need this and we know this is what's going on, we've just got to continue to figure out what extent. And then he kind of shifts position and demeanor and everything, and then starts talking about how the trauma I've been through and how he can't imagine. First of all, this guy is not a psychologist or a doctorate psychiatrist. Rippinger supposedly is, but not this guy. And Rippinger was not there. And so he kind of shifts and he starts talking about the psychological stuff. And I started responding about, I had been through basically nearly a decade of intensive therapies of all sorts of kinds. And was in therapy before all of this started, when I came back from Europe, and that they had been able to get, you know, make a lot of progress, and that the therapist, particularly the Catholic therapist that I saw, PhD therapist, psychologist, Catholic, originally for 3 solid years, her after just a few months was the one who suggested I go to Eitenauer for spiritual direction and help, because she knew that the problems and things that I was having were not all of a psychological nature. And at that time, I had no idea or suspect that I had any sort of demonic problem. After I came back from Europe, I thought I was peachy fine. That's because I was completely brainwashed by that cult over there. And so, you know, I thought everything was my fault. My family's problem was my fault. Everything that happened was my fault. And now I went to Europe and I was fixed, and I can come back and fix everything. You know, I was completely... That was probably as delusional as I've ever been. People want to use that word, but anyways, he shifted to that, and that's when I got this just like knife in the gut feeling. I was like, he's going to turn the psychological card, dude. This is not good. This is not good. This guy, after all these years and everything I've been through, he's going to sit here and tell me that they can't help me, or I need to get more psychological therapy for another decade before they help me. And I started to panic. Not externally, nobody knew, nobody could tell. I went into a panic. The last thing I remember him saying at that sitting was, I think, you know, we think that you probably need to go have therapy. Go get therapy, go get yourself help, get the help that you need for the trauma and abuse and stuff that's happened to you. And then after that, then maybe we could talk about helping you with the demonic stuff. And that's when everything kind of started to shatter a little bit. I felt like I wasn't quite in reality at that moment. I left the room. I walked outside. I sat on the porch to breathe. I don't remember how long I was out there. I couldn't have been out there longer than 5 or 10 minutes. I regrouped. I came back inside. And then that's when I overheard in the other room the woman who came with me talking to him and them having a discussion about how I need to go get more therapy and get help for this trauma that I must have. Again, imagine is what he says. He's not a therapist, he's not a doctor, he's not even the exorcist that was supposed to meet me there, that I came there for the testing for. And they did not carry out anything as they committed to or did with anybody else. And I can hear them talking about how in that moment, that was like it for me, in the sense that I couldn't believe it was happening. I couldn't believe this was going to happen. I couldn't believe that after all of this we came here. The exorcist wasn't even here. Didn't even have the decency to be there. Didn't carry out anything that they committed. Didn't do any amount of prayers that they were supposed to do. Didn't do the proper testing. And then this priest who's been there maybe a year or two observing decides to play doctor and write me off right after stating that I needed help with the demonic problems, and then completely flipping and switching over to a psychological. I knew it was happening because I've been through this so many times. I know how people talk about things and how they dismiss things, whether it's deliberate or not. I didn't know what this guy's angle was. I just knew this was not. I knew I was leaving without help. I knew they weren't going to help me at that point. I didn't say anything, but I knew inside exactly what was happening. And I went into the chapel there, where there's the Catholic tabernacle, where there's the leftover host, which is, as a Catholic, you believe that's where Jesus is. Jesus is in that tabernacle. That's where God is, physically and in every other possible way, is in that golden box up there on their altar. And I knew in that moment, and I'd known before, but in that moment more than anything, that God was the only thing that was going to save me from the situation. And so I went to that chapel, and nobody else was in there. It was basically covered with curtains. It wasn't a wall. There was walls, but the opening to it was like a curtain thing, a really thick curtain, and it was carpeted, which was interesting. It was carpeted, it had rugs and like folding chairs in it. It was a very small area. But I went in there and I dropped to my knees. I dropped to my knees and my head hit the floor. Like, you know, like the Muslims on their prayer rugs. I literally... I started crying like I never cried before, but completely silently, and I begged God, under my breath, but out loud. I just begged him not to let this happen again. I begged him. I said, whatever's happening, don't let this happen again. Don't let this happen to me again. Please don't let me leave here and not be helped. Please. Whatever just happened, fix it. This was my last hope, and I knew I was about to be sent home and dismissed by a completely inexperienced, non-exorcist priest. I was on my knees, and my head hit the floor, and I just begged God. I begged him. Over and over again, I said, no one can save me but you. What do you want me to do? I've done everything that I've been told. I've done anything that I could possibly know to do. And my head is on that floor. That's all I knew. I didn't even look up. I didn't even look up. No. I just begged. And I remember hearing her, the woman who came with me, coming in from behind. I could hear them looking for me, and I was just frozen on the floor like that. And I knew she had come in. And at some point between when she walked in and was saying my name and when I either answered her or tried to answer her but wasn't able to, I can't remember. I just know that she'd come in. And then my body went into a freeze lock. And to explain what I mean by that is the demonic took over my body completely at that point. I could not remove myself up off the floor. I couldn't get up. I couldn't speak. I was locked in that prostrate position on the ground with my head on the floor. I think that there might have been times throughout that I was telling her that I couldn't move, that I was trying to move and I couldn't move. And what happened between that and what I'm about to say next, I was not aware for, but she told me what she witnessed. And what she witnessed was me on the floor unable to move, her trying to tell the priest that I was on the floor unable to move. She said they then came in the chapel and started to pick up prayer books, and she thought that they were going to start doing prayers. She thought that, oh, okay, here we go, you know, they're going to help her. They picked up their stacks of books and walked away. They left the chapel and they walked away. She said, I went into just these full demonic manifestations. She said she could tell it wasn't me. I don't remember a lot of what she said, I know that she said the notes and things that were written down were tore up. I know that she said I continually tried to leave that chapel and I could not. And I know what she meant by that because I went through that in awareness of possessed states where I would try to walk into different areas or doorways and there would be this like invisible force field. I don't know how to explain it. Nobody can see it. I can't see it either, but I can't get past it. So it's almost like you try to walk through something and then, you know, you can't, you step back. She told me that he kept telling us that we needed to leave and that if we didn't leave, that they were going to call the sheriff. The first thing I remember after my body locking and freezing on the floor there, this now ends with whatever she was telling me she saw. I remember Laura saying, "Come on, we gotta go now." And I just got up and walked with her. I didn't know what had happened in between. For me, it was like I froze and couldn't move for a few minutes, and then I got up and walked out with her. And we crossed the entryway where he was, standing at the door. And he had my papers and documents and everything that had ever happened to me, and the reports and everything that I had given him that morning that was so important that they were supposed to look at and evaluate. And he handed them to me, and I didn't understand why. I said, "Don't you need these? You wanted to look at these tonight, right?" And he said, "No, I don't need them anymore." I was completely confused, but at the same time I knew what was happening. I knew I was being rejected. I knew. I was like, well, there's one more day of hope, maybe. We come back one more day. Maybe the exorcist will actually be there tomorrow, right? I get in the car. It was like an SUV that we had rented. And I just sat in the passenger seat and I tried to stay calm. I sat there with my documents in my hand and I could hear them outside. I could hear the woman I was with and I could hear Paranello. And I heard him say, "You can't come back here. You guys are not welcome to come back here. Don't come back here tomorrow or at all." I heard that. I didn't know what happened. I knew the way that things seemed like they were going, but the fact that he handed back my documents, all of a sudden didn't need them, and then I heard him tell her that he started talking to her about, she started begging him. I could hear her, she started crying. And she started saying, "Please don't do this to her. You don't understand. She needs help." She was begging him, asking what he meant, you know, just trying to get through to him somehow. Asking if Ripperger was going to be there the next day, you know, if anything could be done. And I couldn't speak. I just sat in the car, and that's when the split started. That's when I started to feel myself just crack into two.